Hi, I'm Ken Ham, President and CEO of Answers in Genesis, the Creation Museum, and the coming Ark Encounter project. I'm here today with Mike Johnson, who's Chief Counsel for Freedom Guard, a religious liberty defense organization, because Answers in Genesis is launching a lawsuit against the state of Kentucky that really involves freedom of religion, free exercise of religion, freedom of speech in this great nation of America. I'm here to discuss those details with Mike so that we understand the background, why we're doing what we're doing, what has happened, what has gone on to bring us to this particular position right now at Answers in Genesis. Well, welcome, Mike. We're right here in the fabrication shop of the Ark Design Studios, where a lot of hard work is going on, getting the Ark exhibits ready for the life-size Noah's Ark that opens next year. But we have an issue before us in regard to litigation with the state of Kentucky, and numerous bloggers and media outlets have spread a lot of misinformation about the tax rebate program and also a lot of false information about employment laws as they relate to the Ark Encounter project. But before we get into all the details, Mike, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, the organization you're from, and why you're involved in helping Answers in Genesis in regard to this lawsuit against the state of Kentucky?
Sure, Ken. Thanks for having us. It's an important cause, and we're so grateful that Answers in Genesis has the temerity to take this stand. Freedom Guard is a not-for-profit public interest law firm dedicated to the defense of religious liberty in America. And as you know, that's a liberty that's under increasing assault, and there's a lot of work to be done to defend that. Our organization's purpose is to educate the government and citizens about important constitutional rights. Important among those is the right to the free exercise of religion. Freedom Guard is joined in this case, as you know, by the Center for Religious Expression, which is our colleagues at another top religious defense organization, and they do this work in the courts around the country. And we've defended these cases for nearly 20 years, our organizations in the federal and state courts around the nation, and we provided our legal services and litigation services to persons of faith and organizations, and even sometimes to government officials who are on the right side of these issues. And we're nonprofit organizations, so we provide all of our services as a public interest. It's free of charge to our clients, and we're happy to do that. It's our mission, it's what we do, and we're delighted to be serving your cause in this important case.
Mike, before we get into some of the background details, why don't you give us a summary of what this lawsuit is really all about and why you are leading the charge here with Answers in Genesis in regard to what's happening with the state of Kentucky?
Well, this legal action has become necessary because the state of Kentucky has taken some adverse action with regard to the ministry. What they've done, in effect, is engaged in viewpoint discrimination. They have decided to exclude this organization from a tax rebate program that's offered to all applicants across the state. The way this is set up is under state law in Kentucky, as in many states, they offer a tax incentive program, and they say if you're going to build a large tourist attraction, we'll incentivize you from coming here instead of going to a neighboring state, for example. And we'll say that over the course of years, if you hit certain performance standards, then we'll rebate back to you a portion of the new tax dollars that you generate. As you know, Answers in Genesis and its subsidiaries met all the requirements for that under any objective criteria, but suddenly they're being effectively blocked from this program. That's an unlawful action on behalf of the state, and unfortunately, sometimes you have to go to court to get those things rectified.
So the tourism incentive here in Kentucky has nothing to do with a facility like the Ark project using taxpayer money to build it, because $0 are used from the state to build it. It's just a rebate program after it's open and generating sales tax, and it's all because it's bringing economic impact to the community, to the state. That's what it's all about. And secondly, what's happening is really a violation of the laws in this nation that allow the free exercise of religion.
That at its essence, is what all of this is about.
You know, when Answers in Genesis was looking for a place for the Ark Encounter project, we had a real estate agent search Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, and that person came up with a number of possible sites. But the tax incentive program here in Kentucky was very attractive in regard to ensuring that we stayed in Kentucky and built this facility in Kentucky. Tell me, people say that Oh, but if you're receiving a benefit from the government because you're getting a tax rebate, you can't do that as a religious organization, separation of church and state and so on. How do you react to those sorts of accusations that we see in the media and from many of the bloggers?
Well, it's based on misinformation and a misunderstanding about the law. Look, it's very well established in federal and state law that religious organizations get to be treated just like any other in a program like this. When you have a facially neutral, that's what we call it in constitutional law, a facially neutral tax incentive program that the government effectively opens it to all applicants. Just because an applicant happens to be religious does not mean that they can be treated differently. They can't be excluded from the program just because of their viewpoint. And that's the problem here. Under Kentucky, they have what's called the Tourism Development Act. It's a state statute and others that come from it that say that we're going to offer this incentive to a broad array of persons, all applicants effectively, and we're going to set up objective criteria. If they meet this criteria, if they're going to enhance economic development and bring new tourism dollars to the state, then we're going to allow them to participate in the program. And as you know, over the years, they've given this to a broad, diverse array of applicants. I mean, other museums, other entertainment facilities, other theme parks, for example, even a beer distillery museum. The problem is when Answers in Genesis showed up with the Ark Encounter project, suddenly they say they have a problem with it. They can't do that under federal or state law, and that's why we're going to have to go to court over it.
We hear a lot of information out there, or misinformation, through the bloggers and through the media, but they're claiming that we can't receive this particular benefit, and yet they don't cite the law.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that neither the state nor the bloggers or anyone has mentioned any law that's on their side, because it doesn't exist, Ken. I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court precedent and the precedent from the federal appellate courts, like the Sixth Circuit, which controls Kentucky and the surrounding states, have been very consistent on this matter, and they've said, just because you're a religious organization does not exclude you from a facially neutral government incentives program like we have here. The law's very well settled on this, and there's really no dispute about it. That's why it's sort of confusing why the state's taken the position that it has.
Do you think many of those who are coming out against Answers in Genesis and claiming that we're the ones violating the law, do you think they know what the laws really state?
Certainly the lawyers at these organizations know what the law is. They can read it just as clearly as we can. And I think that a lot of times people engage in their talking points and their messaging. They probably know that it's not anchored in the law, but they're trying to advance an agenda. It's very clear. Unfortunately, so many people don't understand the law. They buy into these messages that they hear in the media, and they just accept it as fact and truth. And that's an important reason why we're doing this video, to help people understand the real facts behind this and understand that all you're doing here is trying to defend these basic rights. There's nothing controversial or extraordinary about your position at all. You're just saying the government should not be hostile to people who have religious viewpoints. The law is very clear on it, and we're going to get that reestablished once again.
There are people out there, media, I've even heard some government officials that seem to be saying, look, the bottom line is the state can't give money to an organization that they consider discriminates in their hiring. So, I mean, just to put it bluntly like that, then how would you respond to that?
Well, don't take my word for it. Let's take the word of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, which is the federal appellate court that governs this area, Kentucky and surrounding states, which has consistently followed U.S. Supreme Court precedent on this very point. But here's a quote from the Sixth Circuit from 2009. This is recent law. They said, so long as the government benefits program, quote, allocates benefits in an even-handed manner to a broad and diverse spectrum of beneficiaries, a religious group may be qualified in spite of, rather than because of, its religious character, unquote. So basically what they're saying is, when you have, again, a facially neutral tax incentive program and you open it to all applicants, you can't treat the religious group differently. You have to treat them just as everyone else. This has been decided in the last few years by the Sixth Circuit. The law is very clear, and we're going to have that, the state of Kentucky is going to be reminded of that when we go to the court and have this out in front of a judge.
Now, has the state of Kentucky actually said that because we're a religious organization, that's why we can't get this rebate?
They have, in writing and in their public comments, they have said that the reason they have trouble with this project and this economic incentive application is because of its religious overtones and its religious message and its viewpoint. And that's what makes the state's action unconstitutional.
But the interesting thing is, they've always known that we're a religious organization. We're very overtly Christian, always have been. In fact, everything we've said about Answers in Genesis, the Creation Museum, and the Ark Encounter has shown that we're an evangelistic ministry, and we make no apology about that. So the state already knew that, and yet they even gave us preliminary approval. So what happened?
Well, they did. They obviously knew that the Ark Encounter would be about biblical themes and ideas. And of course, you were very straightforward with that, have always been in the public record, in the media, even in all the submissions and the applications that have gone into the state over this project. So there's no question that everyone knows what this is about. I have a theory about why the state has changed its tune, Ken, and I think it's because a lot of these atheist organizations from around the country have begun to apply public pressure to state officials. And they obviously oppose the Ark Encounter, what the theme park is about. They oppose your ministry and these ideas. And in their view, they need to silence and censor viewpoints with which they disagree. I think they've had some success in applying pressure to state officials who don't like that kind of attention. And I think that's what's basically motivated their action in recent weeks and months. You know, it's also important to point out, Ken, even the state's own consultant who studied this determined that this project meets all the objective criteria under the Tourism Development Act, under the state law that applies here. So for them to say that, you know, your religious viewpoint should exclude you from that really defies the law on its face and in every way that it's been applied in the past.
And that independent consultant actually did quite a lot of research in regard to this application for phase one of the Ark Encounter project and said we'll fulfill all the requirements.
Yes, and still, in spite of that, the state has taken this kind of hardline position against your application, and it really defies common sense, and of course, it defies the law as well, and that's why we have to go to court to get that sorted out.
So you're saying just because we're a religious organization is not a reason for the state to deny this tax rebate program?
No, that's exactly right, and if they do deny you on that basis, which is what they've done, they've stepped on a First Amendment landmine. I mean, they have violated an important constitutional principle. And that's what the federal courts are set up for, so that we can go and defend those rights. And we have to, because it's important. It's, as you mentioned, it's more than just a dispute about the Ark Encounter. It's about the overriding principle, and that is the free exercise of religion, the right to free speech and the right of conscience. And those are things that have to be vigorously defended, or else those freedoms will be taken away.
Now, there's also been a lot of misinformation about employment in relation to the Ark Encounter. And that's another factor that the state brought up as well, by stating that you can't hire people that agree with you, as we do at Answers in Genesis. In fact, the bloggers, other media outlets have spread a lot of misinformation about this because we had an employment opportunity for somebody to work on the Ark Encounter project, but it was a person deployed by Answers in Genesis, and they have to sign the Answers in Genesis statement of faith. And then immediately they started saying the Ark Encounter is going to discriminate in its hiring and they can't do this. Please explain the employment aspects of this.
Yeah, there's a couple of laws that are at issue here. The first is Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. That's the federal law that everyone knows that says when you're hiring for a new position in your company, you can't discriminate against persons on the basis of religion or any number of other protected categories. But here's the important thing. There's an exemption in the federal law that everyone knows. If you're a church or a religious organization, as we are here, then you get to employ a preference in your hiring. It just makes good sense. It's rather obvious that a church should be able to hire employees who agree with their theology, their philosophy, their worldview. It's an important principle to preserve. And it applies to this organization just like it would to any other religious organization. And again, very well established in federal law and state law. Kentucky has a statute precisely on point, as all the other states do, that say if you're a religious organization or association or corporation, you get to employ a religious preference in your hiring. That's how you maintain your identity as a private organization such as this, and it's an important principle to defend. You know, we have to be intellectually consistent about our positions, and we are. We believe in free speech. We believe in everyone expressing their ideas as they want, but all we're saying is that everyone should be treated equally and given equal dignity in that regard, that Christians should be able to express their viewpoints as well. No one is going to force any tourists to come to the Ark Encounter theme park, of course. People will come voluntarily, and when they do, it's going to bring a huge economic benefit to the surrounding area. That's why granting the rebate, allowing this application to be approved by the state, it would be a win-win-win for everyone involved. I mean, you know the stats. we've been very impressed. The feasibility studies have said that the first year of operation, 2016, the Ark Encounter theme park is going to have in excess of 1.2 million tourists, visitors that will come, and they'll bring a lot of dollars and they'll spend them here in the area. So it makes good sense to approve it, and it really makes no sense to deny it.
So you've given us some of the background there. So what will the lawsuit that Answers in Genesis is now a part of actually going to involve in regard to the state?
Well, the lawsuits, at its essence, will be a very simple legal question. Can the state discriminate against Answers in Genesis or the Ark Encounter just because they're a religious entity and they want to avail themselves of all the freedoms they're given under federal and state law? The answer to that's very simply no. I mean, and that's what the courts will ultimately conclude. We believe that they'll say the law is very clear, it's very well established. You can't treat the religious group differently or at a disadvantage in the way that you treat anyone else. And at its essence, that's what the legal action is all about. And we think we'll get a resolution in relatively short time on that.
Make no mistake about it, this is a huge deal. We are eager to work with Ark Encounter officials to make this exciting tourism project happen, and we look forward to its completion. This is an application for a theme park. The law doesn't allow us to discriminate about the entertainment subject matter of theme parks as long as it's legal and in good taste. I think it's clear that this is an economic development project, that our laws don't allow us to discriminate as to the entertainment subject matter of a theme park. And as long as it is legal and meets all of our criteria, I think it's clearly constitutional, and we're going to move ahead with it.
The Herald Leader newspaper in Lexington quoted the governor of Kentucky, Steve Beshear, as saying, "We expect any entity that accepts state incentives not to discriminate on any basis in hiring." While the leaders of Ark Encounter had previously agreed not to discriminate in hiring based on religion, they now refuse to make that commitment, and it has become apparent that they do intend to use religious beliefs as a litmus test for hiring decisions. For that reason, we cannot proceed with the tourism incentive application for the Ark Encounter project. Supposedly, that's what the governor said. So can you respond to that?
Well, there are a number of problems with the governor's latest position, as he's just been quoted. First of all, that's not any part of the Tourism Development Act. The state law that controls the whole incentive program says nothing with regard to religion. It's a facially neutral program, and that's what makes it, on its face, constitutional, meaning that you can't treat religious groups differently. You can't give them a new or different set of rules. They have to be treated, as we've said, just like everyone else. The other problem with that is that it violates the Religious Freedom Act that Kentucky passed through the General Assembly, and that most other states, now many other states, have passed, which mirrors the federal law on point, that basically says that religious organizations get to maintain their identity. They can't be given different sets of rules, and under the First Amendment and all the statutes that apply here, the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act that we've discussed, you have these benefits, you have these freedoms under the law, and it doesn't matter if the governor agrees with that or not, he can't take those freedoms away.
Now, in this latest application that Answers in Genesis made for Phase 1 of the Ark to receive that tax rebate, the state agreed with us in writing that we would say that we would obey all applicable federal and state laws.
Sure.
And that's what we intend to do.
Well, that's exactly right. That's what we're discussing, is that, of course, Answers in Genesis and all of its subsidiaries are Christian organizations. We believe in a high ethical standard, and you followed that in every regard. And so that was an easy thing for your organization to commit to. The state, of course, will abide by all applicable federal and state laws, and that's what this lawsuit is about. Ironically, we are trying to ensure that the government does apply the law fairly across the board, and there's really not much more to it than that.
Now, you really do see this as a fairly black and white issue, don't you?
It really is. It's black and white under the law, and that's what's been surprising to us, that the state hasn't recognized that, or at least acknowledged it, and changed their position. I think the court is going to sort this out. We've been doing this a long time. Our lawyers have been litigating these cases for almost 2 decades, and this one is pretty clear-cut as these cases go, and I expect the court will see it that way.
And it's really important for Answers in Genesis to really be involved in this legal action because it relates to much more than a tax rebate.
It is. This is a bellwether case. All of these cases have a big precedent-setting factor. But this one's high profile. We're talking about a lot of money, and we're talking about an important issue with regard to the government's treatment of religious organizations, a large one like yours, but the same principle would apply to smaller organizations all around the country. And what happens here, I think, has a big effect on what happens to other organizations, not just in Kentucky, not just in the region, but around the country. And that's why it's important to draw this line in the sand and to take this fight to the court.
So if the ACLU was consistent, it really should be supporting us in this?
Well, that's right. I mean, it's our side that's intellectually consistent about this. We defend free speech. We defend the expansion of free speech and the free marketplace of ideas. You'll not find Christian organizations trying to censor and silence the viewpoints of the atheists. It's always the other way around. And that's what we see here. Groups like the ACLU and Freedom from Religion Foundation, they object to the Christians being able to avail themselves of this basically a public benefit. And that's wrong under the law, and it shouldn't be, government officials should not bow to the pressure to do those sorts of things.
Every Christian, even if they don't agree with our position on Genesis, should really be supportive of this. In fact, probably not just Christians, because it relates to a much greater issue.
Yeah, I would say more than just religious groups or those with, people of faith. I would say anyone with any viewpoint, especially minority viewpoints, because it's a double-edged sword. If the government has to be neutral with regard to the treatment of persons that have different ideas, that can be a double-edged sword. So, yeah, what happens here has an impact not just for the protection of the rights of Christian organizations or even religious groups as a broader group, but for everyone. That we ought to have free speech. We ought to defend the right of conscience and defend the right to go into the public square, as it were, and share our beliefs, whatever they are. I think the government officials at the end of the day will have to acknowledge that the law is what it is. This is black letter law. It's right there on its face. It says what it says. The court cases are very clear on this issue. And at the end of the day, I think that this matter will prevail and you'll be able to go forward. The Ark Encounter theme park is going to be built one way or the other. But I think the court is going to conclude that these tax rebates have to apply here just as they apply to everyone else.
And one of the reasons we wanted to do this video press release, if we want to call it that, is because we wanted to make sure people understood the real basis of what's happening here, what the tourism incentive program is all about in Kentucky, and what's really happening between the state of Kentucky and Answers in Genesis over the ARK project. So as we sort of wrap this up then, tell me, what would you like to see come out of this lawsuit? I mean, what really is the outcome that you would like to see, and why is that important?
Well, as I've mentioned, we anticipate a relatively quick resolution of this. There's not a lot of facts at issue here at all. It's really just a straightforward question of law, and that is, can religious entities or organizations be treated differently? We know that the law already establishes that they cannot, and so we expect to prevail. And when that happens, I hope it sends a message to other religious organizations, and as we said, even broader than that, to other people who have minority viewpoints, that they have the right to freedom of speech, that we have the right to the free exercise of our religion, and you don't have to put your religion in a box. You can bring that into the public square. You can bring it into an open, facially neutral economic incentive application process, and you can be who you are. That's the beauty of being an American. That's the beauty of free speech. Sometimes we have to be subjected to viewpoints that we don't necessarily agree with, but that's what living in a free country is all about. That's why this fight is worth it, and that's why it means something to everybody. We have to preserve those constitutional rights, or they're going to be taken away from us.
Mike, I do want to thank you as Chief Counsel for Freedom Guard, and also Nate Callum, who's Chief Counsel for the Center for Religious Expression, for providing your services free of charge to Answers in Genesis to enable us to be involved in this legal action. But it's not just really to us. You're providing this service for the people of America, because this is really, as I've said, much greater issue than just Answers in Genesis.
It is. This is public interest law, and that's why they call our organizations public interest law firms. We're nonprofits, and we're delighted to do it. We're defending freedom for everyone, and I think that's an important cause that all of us should be involved in.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.